Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or a personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Dr. Anita Nowak. Dr. Novak is an award winning educator, author, speaker, and one of the world's leading voices on empathy and social change. She holds a doctorate in education from McGill University, where she spent over a decade teaching courses on happiness, leadership, ethics, and social innovation. Her work has helped shape a global understanding of empathy, not just as a feeling, but a powerful, teachable force for personal and collective transformation. She is the author of Purposeful Empathy, a book that makes the case that empathy is not a trait we either have or don't, but it's a skill, one that we can learn, practice, and choose with intention. Across her 3 TED Talks, she shares a clear and urgent message. Empathy is not passive. It's a purposeful practice, a way of being, and a form of everyday activism that holds the power to reshape our relationships, our systems, and our world. Dr. Novak works at the intersection of emotional intelligence, system change, and human connection, coaching changemakers, advising organizations, and reminding us that compassion, when practiced with courage, has the power to create real and lasting impact. Beyond the research, the teaching, and the accolades, she is a translator of the soul's language, and she's devoted her life to helping others remember what we were born knowing but taught to forget: that connection is sacred, and that love, when lived out loud, is the most radical force on earth. Her work invites us to lead with presence, to meet one another with care, and to remember that empathy is not a weakness, but that it's wisdom in motion. And when we choose to lead with our hearts, we're not stepping away from the world, we're stepping more fully into it. So, Dr. Novak, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being my guest.
Jalon, let me take a minute just to acknowledge how present you were in introducing me. So present that I was listening, thinking, I'd like to meet that woman. I know it's me, but you were so present for that intro. Thank you. I feel very welcome to your podcast, and I feel super honored to spend this time with you.
Thank you so much for that. It's a pleasure to have you here to introduce you. And I did give a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today?
Mm, yeah, origin stories, they're good. I remember I was in my 20s doing my undergrad in marketing. And I thought I wanted to wear stiletto heels and carry a Gucci attaché bag and go to an office tower and work in public relations or something. And it was in the third year of my undergrad that my roommate, who was dating a woman at another university in the city, was being dragged to a bunch of films because she was part of a film festival. And it was a feminist film festival. And I don't think I knew what feminism meant back then. And so one night he says, like, why don't you come along? And I'm like, okay. So I'm in the theater watching a documentary produced by the National Film Board of Canada called The Vienna Tribunal. And in 1995, there had been a human rights conference, a 5-day conference devoted to human rights, one day of which was devoted to women's human rights. And so hundreds of women from around the world were invited to testify about the plight of women in their country. And the documentary was just snippets, one after another, of different testimonials. And I remember sitting in the audience enraged because I was about to graduate from one of the best universities in Canada and arguably in the world. And I had not heard of female genital cutting before. I had not heard about kids under 10 being sex trafficked. I had not heard about women being stoned to death, buried up to their shoulder, and the size of the stone, the appropriate size of the stone, in documents for the government to use. Like, I was incensed that I didn't know that that was happening, and I was incensed that that was happening. And I remember walking out of that theater, and it was like the whole axis of the world changed for me. Like, what was I thinking? Trying to sell more lipstick, you know?
Mm.
So I just became really obsessed with women's issues And then I got interested in how the media plays a role in how we perceive ourselves and one another. And so my master's degree was actually in media and communication studies, and this is long before social media. And I moved kind of away from women's issues, not that I didn't care about them anymore, but I became more interested in youth. And so I became particularly passionate about media literacy for young people. Like, how do they view themselves and the world? What narratives are they learning? What narratives are they missing? And so that was what I started my PhD doing. And somewhere around halfway through the PhD program, and now I'm about to go into like the longer version of the story. Is that okay with you?
You're good.
Yeah, good. So about halfway through the degree, my sister had started her degree in the Faculty of Law. And the law school was having their inaugural conference on human rights. And the first ever theme was the prevention of genocide. And so the two of us went to the opening plenary. So there's like 800 people in this big hall, standing room only, and there's 4 chairs on the stage. And then it was filled by 4 people from 4 survivors from 4 different genocides, which, like, as a sentence, when you say out loud, says a lot. So there was someone from Cambodia, a Holocaust survivor, somebody from Bosnia, and someone from Rwanda. And the Rwandan woman, by the name of, her name is going to come back to me. I'm actually embarrassed. I can't remember right off the top of my head. Esther Mutawayo. She got up to speak, and behind her came down a huge jumbo screen. And there were about like 50, 60 people in a family gathering, like a picture of somebody who was celebrating an anniversary or something. And she said, I want you to look at this picture, take it in, and understand that after the 100 days or so of the genocide, it was me and my daughters, the sole survivors. And it was a moment, like the whole audience, like collectively, like taking that in. And then she said, I hear a lot from people, especially in the West, if only we had known what was going on, we would have done something. And she said, I mean, I'm making up her words, but along the lines of, I'm calling your bluff. Right now, people in the world are suffering, and you continue to fail us. And it's the only time in my life, but I literally physically felt my ears on fire. Okay. I felt like she was talking directly to me. And it just so happened that my sister was studying with a young man who had come to Canada as a refugee from Rwanda. And we ended up spending a summer at his mother's organization that is called Tuba Humorize. And they provide support for hundreds of women in Kigali. And so we ended up doing some fundraising and going down for the summer and helping them launch a microfinance project. So I'm halfway through my PhD and we're about to go on this trip. And I'd said to my thesis supervisor that I needed some time off from my PhD because I had always been moonlighting through the whole doctoral program, but I got picked up by an organization for a fundraising campaign to raise $20 million for girls' education. And I told him I couldn't do both. And he was totally against the idea of me taking time off. So imagine I'm like 6 months into my time off period or whatever, sabbatical. So I come into the meeting. He's like, we need to touch base because I don't want you to forget about your PhD. And he's like, what's new? And we're chatting and I'm telling him I'm going to Rwanda in the summer, like 3 months down the road. And the meeting lasted 10 minutes. And he said to me, I want you to completely change your thesis topic. And I was like, Michael, what are you talking about? And he's like, look, I just heard you talk about this trip that you're going to go on, how meaningful it is to you. You're lit up like a Christmas tree. Those were his words. And he's like, you're not passionate about your current topic. You think you are, but there's something more. Why don't you go home to the drawer or the box or the folder where you keep stuffing stuff and go find out what you're really passionate about? I left his office and I could, if there had been smoke capable of coming out of my ears, you would have seen it because I was so blazing mad. I was like, how dare he tell me what I'm passionate about? And then 2 weeks later, I get over my ego and I'm like scouring my whole apartment, going through everything, trying to find this box or whatever. And lo and behold, I'm finally at my metal filing cabinet, 2 drawers. legal size folders. I'm going through each one until I come across one that's marked miscellaneous. Didn't even know, it's my handwriting, didn't even know I had a miscellaneous folder in my filing cabinet. I pull it out, spread the stuff on the dining room table. I'm looking at like articles about acid rain, the HIV/AIDS crisis that began in South Africa, all these doodads. And I was like, what the heck is all of this? And then I came across this little article, like this long, in a local newspaper about a boy in Ontario who had gone to school for a week without wearing shoes. Why? Because he'd just learned about childhood poverty in the global South. And he learned that kids don't have shoes sometimes to go to school. And he wanted to know what that felt like. And he wanted to raise awareness and raise some money. And then it was like, oh, and I looked at all the other things and I was like, oh, it's all about change makers. It's all about people who are doing stuff to create positive change in the world. And I didn't have the vocabulary of social entrepreneurship or social innovation, but that's what these people were. So to my thesis advisor's credit, I did switch my topic. And I ended up interviewing dozens and dozens of professional change makers to understand why they did work, the thing that they did. Why did they spend their talent working on climate change mitigation, justice reform, poverty alleviation, homelessness? I was agnostic to what they were talking about. But I was like, why do you do the work you do? And there were two things that the research showed. One was they all had service modeled in their homes, meaning to say like their family had this ethos of giving back for whatever reason. It could have been faith-based or it could have been from their own lived experience. So this idea of like you give back. I was like, oof, that's important. The second one was, even though they didn't use the language, they were describing a sense of empathy that they felt for others who were marginalized or somehow hurting in some way and couldn't turn a blind eye. They felt called to act on the empathy that they felt. And so then that's when I was like, empathy. Let me learn more about this because this sounds to me like a really important human trait that we can leverage for like big change in the world. And so that's the origin story to why I do the work I do.
Thank you for sharing that. And I was just imagining that little boy going to school with no shoes by choice. And what he probably went through, but what he was determined to do. A little boy. That is I'm so glad that you were asked to change your major, even though you were mad at the time.
Yeah.
Mm. Something that I do really appreciate about your work, and especially after hearing your story, your origin story, is that it's rooted in both intellect and feeling. Has that always been true for you?
That's a good question. I didn't set out to like pursue degree after degree because I was on some like career track. I just like learning a lot. And I'm grateful that I followed my muse. Like I followed what I was genuinely interested in learning about. So there's a big part of my understanding of empathy that comes from like a rigorous research process, whether I'm looking at the philosophy or the psychology or the sociology or the neuroscience of empathy for that matter. I think I've always been a feeling person, but I think of late, I haven't realized, it's only lately that I've realized the degree to which we are the way we are in the world, and we may not be conscious of this, is driven by some of our early experiences in life and even maybe generational stuff that's happened. So our bodies, there's a famous book called Our Bodies Keep the Score, and Gabor Mate's work on how much lives in our bodies. It's only recently that I've come to understand how our emotions are cues for some of the deep inner work, especially the healing work that we deserve, especially if we want to be good citizens, good neighbors, good parents. So I think I was a feeling person that didn't understand how much our emotions are great companions to the best version we could be if we decide to lean into that. And for the longest time, I just kind of, ignored whatever my shadow self was, my dysfunctions, my triggers, whatever. I do a little bit of talk therapy here and there and there. And I just didn't understand how deep it goes. And I'm glad that some of the science and some of the work that you're doing and some of the people you've interviewed, how much they are, really putting forward the message like, guys, if you are feeling triggered, there's something bigger to explore. Which, by the way, the theory that the like the Buddhists have been saying for 2,500 years.
Right. It's funny how, I guess, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And the fact that we think we know so much, but we don't even know that our feelings are messengers and that they're giving us cues. And we've gotten so far away from the wisdom in our bodies that now it's like we kind of have to backtrack. And it's funny because you mentioned that you've always been a feeling person, and I think about that little boy who went to school with no shoes, and I was wondering, like, what were you like as a little girl? Like, did you have any moments like that, or were you kind of, I guess, more reserved with your feelings or expressing yourself?
I don't know if both my parents were born during World War II, and my mom in Germany. There were 4 children in the family before her, and her father spent some time in jail for his involvement during World War II. And when he came out, he was a broken person. He probably was not a very, very kind person to start with, but he had a lot of problems, and that impacted how she was raised and her sibling after that. So she grew up in a family that had a lot of dysfunction and trauma. My dad too. As far as I know, he was born in France to Polish parents. They were trying to save enough money to come to Canada as immigrants and not refugees. My grandfather was dead set on that for, I guess, I don't know, I can't explain for what reason, but so they worked 2 jobs apiece. And for a while, my dad was put in an orphanage, like at a very young age, and I can only imagine what that meant for him as a person. So, like a lot of people, our parents and grandparents like went through a lot of stuff, and they didn't have the resources or the tools, or it wasn't socially acceptable to do the healing work. And so I was raised in a family where they were, probably doing the best that they could. But that doesn't mean that it was necessarily the best version of parenting and, a family to grow up in. So I don't know. I have a whole mixed bag of memories of what my childhood was like. I don't remember having a lot of joy in my family. I remember like it was work before play, which was the mentality of immigrants anyways. And I certainly wouldn't want to put shade on that. But I think I didn't grow up with a ton of levity. I didn't grow up with a ton of like playfulness. Like I grew up with a sense of responsibility and earning affection. So I guess there was some, that I continue to work through some of that.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's transition into the heart of your work, which is purposeful empathy. What is purposeful empathy, and what does it mean to practice empathy with purpose?
Yeah. So let me answer that in 2 ways. The simple way is that I like to think of empathy as the innate trait that unites us in our common humanity, with a little caveat. And that is, even though we, as humans, and this is a universal thing, they've tested this, we all have similar experiences around joy and shame and fear and love and hope and despair. So there's some universal emotions that humans have. So it's really important that even though empathy is the innate trait that unites us in our common humanity, and we have access to similar feelings and emotions, that we have to be careful not to project onto other people and assume that we understand what somebody's going through because we've gone through something similar. So that's the only little footnote caveat to my kind of loose definition of what empathy is. But I'll add to that by saying that when I was doing the research about empathy, there's a lot of other words that are treated kind of similar. There's pity and sympathy and compassion. And I studied the etymology of the words, and I studied the evolution of the words in the English language, and I came to put it on a continuum. And on the pity side of the continuum, there's power asymmetry embedded in the relationship. So when you pity someone, oh, you poor person, you look down on them. There's like a sense of kind of condescension even, right? But as you make your way across the continuum through sympathy, you get to compassion, and you get to empathy, the power of empathy for me is that we, on a subconscious or conscious level, recognize that we all are human, regardless of what our lived experiences are. We're born, we live, we die. And what our lives might have some, different details, but we are human. And empathy is what humanizes us to one another. I could sit with you and you could share something that you've been through, and something will happen between us that allows me to understand you better and maybe even love you, and vice versa. Empathy allows that, but we have to be careful not to project. So we have this innate capacity for empathy. And then you can even say empathy is two kind of phenomena. There's the affective empathy, which happens to us. It has to do with, our mirror neurons firing in emotional resonance with someone. So for example, watch what's going to happen to your face when I ask you to picture a kid at a park playing, laughing at a birthday party. Okay. You can picture it and look what's happening to your face. Your cheekbones going up, right? That's because your mirror neurons are firing. If you watch somebody stub their toe, you might wince. That's mirror neurons. If you watch a horror movie and scary movie, right? And then you turn down the volume and all of a sudden not so scary anymore. That's all affective empathy. Our mirror neurons are firing in emotional resonance. But there's another kind of empathy that's cognitive empathy that takes place in the prefrontal cortex. We decide to engage in cognitive empathy. It's all about perspective taking. It's all about imagining what someone else is going through. So I place emphasis on purposeful empathy as a choice. Let's not just, we're empathic by nature on a bell curve to a certain extent. We fall somewhere on the bell curve of empathy. So we all have the capacity for empathy, but I'm talking about leaning into empathy. I'm saying let's engage in empathy on purpose, whether that's through how we show up in the world and in our relationships, how we vote, our public policies, that type of thing.
Hearing you talk about that, it reminded me of a story that you mentioned in one of your TED Talks about when you were standing in line and when you got to the counter, the lady was rude to you. Would you mind sharing?
Oh, yeah, sure. So this is when it became real for me. Okay. So I'd been doing a lot of research, and I'd learned that we could become more empathic with practice. It has to do with the neuroplasticity. So I was doing all sorts of experiments, paying it forward at the, Tim Hortons, local coffee shop, and just trying lots of different things. So imagine 15 years ago, before we had cell phones. Okay. So now when we're in a lineup, everybody's looking at their phone. We're distracted until we get to the counter. But back then it was a half-hour wait. It was the holiday season. I wanted to send something through the mail, nothing to distract me. So I was like, when I got to the counter, I wanted to send my package and get on my way. And the woman who greeted me was sharply rude, get under your skin rude. And I remember thinking, F you, you think you can be rude? Hold, attach that suc, we say in French, you met your match, I had that visceral reaction of wanting to take her on. And just in a nanosecond flash, I was like, oh, I can practice empathy. So I literally flipped the switch and I looked at her and I sincerely asked, are you okay? And she waited a little moment because she was trying to figure out, was I being passive aggressive or sarcastic? But I was being sincere. And she looked at me and we were staring at each other at this point. And she burst into tears. And she said, I've been working double shifts for 2 weeks. My son's at home with a fever and I'm getting sick. It's 3 p.m. I haven't had a lunch break. I'm just exhausted, crying. And then at that point, I'm weeping with her. And who knew 10 seconds ago I hated her, and now all of a sudden we're holding hands across the FedEx counter, And we just held space. I just let her just, she was under so much stress and she hadn't taken any care for herself, right? So I was just like, it was just 2 minutes. I remember I got her a mint tea from the food court, came back. She sent my package with grace. And that was that. I don't know her name, but she lives on in me because I understood at a cellular level. Oh, that's the power of empathy.
Wow. What are some ways that people can practice doing that same thing? Like when maybe they realize that somebody's being rude or they're insulted or something, and to take that second and think, okay, instead of responding the same way with the same energy I'm getting, how can I practice empathy now? What are some like little everyday things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I'm answering it, I need everyone who's listening to know I'm still a work in progress. I'm still practicing what I am preaching. Okay. I think the first step is to have awareness that if somebody is rude to you and you feel like, and you're noticing it and you're like triggered by it, or you want to say your piece as well, to just take a beat, just take a breath, like just have the moment of acknowledgement, like, okay, this is where they're at. This is not about me. But that's really hard to do. That's really hard for us to do. Because I think we've become a little bit lazy to give the benefit of the doubt to someone else, strangers or otherwise. And we're now in like completely polarized echo chambers. So we have no time for anybody that gives us the slightest hint that they might not be like us. So I think acknowledging that, just noticing that the way somebody else is showing up is not about me. Maybe it is about me sometimes, but in most times it's not. And to reframe, saying, I am not gonna, go lower with them. I'm not gonna keep like making it worse. I might actually have an opportunity to turn things around and just be kind in response. Very hard to do though. Very, very, very hard to do, especially when we are feeling stressed ourselves. Because it turns out our brains cannot be stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, and empathic at the same time. It's not possible to our brain. So if we're driving around, we're late for a meeting, somebody cuts us off, like we're not going to have time for empathy for that person. Like it's just not possible. Geopolitics, whatever's going on in the next election cycle, inflation, whatever stresses are going on, we're like living chronically through like low grade, medium grade, sometimes high grade anxiety. And now we're supposed to show up as empathic people. So hard to do. So noticing that someone else is going through something and maybe showing up differently for them is one, but also noticing that we're stressed and that our first reaction might actually be confrontational or defensive, and just also giving ourselves a chance to say, okay, that's my body is sending me a signal. I recognize the signal, but I don't have to be hostage to that. I can downgrade. I can de-escalate myself. I can, there's a psychological term, trying to remember, it'll come to me as well. Downregulate. And I'm sure you've spoken about this with other guests, like our breath is a powerful friend. We can learn to breathe, change our parasympathetic, flip the switch to our parasympathetic nervous system. So that's helpful.
How is it for you, as you mentioned, still being a work in progress, when you know so much about empathy, you know so much about the nervous system, the brain? I mean, you're a doctor, you have all these accolades, and yet you're still human. What does that feel like, that space in between the two of them?
Well, I certainly don't feel good if I'm rude to other people. Um, and sometimes I am, depending on the context. And I get off and I'm like, why was I like that? Why was I like that? I'm getting much better at owning it in my own household. So if I
Mm,
speak with a tone and I feel guilty about it, I won't just sit with the guilt or just try to forget it, or worse, like defend my behavior because it was like they did something to me, therefore it was warranted. None of that anymore. Like I'm really working hard at acknowledging as quickly as possible, I just screwed up. I shouldn't have talked to you like that. And the opportunity for repair, I think is a great, I think I'm modeling something important to my daughter. And, I had this experience. I haven't spoken about this in a long, long time, but I had an experience maybe 18 years ago where I was physically standing in a parking spot, okay, on a street, because my sister needed the spot. I was physically standing in the spot for her to get the last spot on that street. And it was like a Monday or Tuesday morning at like 5 minutes to 9. And this woman pulls up and she literally rolled down the window and yelled at me, "Get out of the spot." And I was like, and I stood my ground and she kept moving. Like she kept moving. And I had to move out of the spot and she was swearing at me. And I was just, I remember like, I'd never been sworn at quite like that before. And I remember I had been parked in my car, like in the spot right up in front of her. And I was like back in my car, like reading my newspaper or something. Like I had to call my sister to say, "You didn't get your spot. Like this woman took it over." And all of a sudden I can feel her presence from the periphery of my eye. And she was standing and she's like, "Oh, open the door, open the window." And I don't know what possessed me because she was just foul. And I rolled down the window and she's like, "Could you please get out of the car?" I was thinking, oh my God, this woman wants to accost me physically now. Like, what is this? And I remember when she was yelling at me, I remember saying, "Is this who you are on a Monday morning?" That was the only thing I had, like, and I kind of said it under my breath. I didn't even say it loud. I wasn't even yelling at her. I was just like, "Is this who you are on a Monday morning?" I got out of the car and she held my wrists in a tender way. And she said to me, "This is not who I am on a Tuesday morning. This is not who I am on any day morning. I have no idea what got into me." And this woman was doing her PhD in the building where I was working. And she tracked me down. 2 weeks later, she wrote to me and she said, "I went home that night. I told my husband about what happened." And they were both from like a smaller town in the Maritimes, quieter life, different beat than in Montreal's big city. She said, "My husband and I had such a big talk, we decided to move back home." Right? And so she taught me a big lesson. She could have been full of ego and just stayed firm in her,
mm,
like, "F you is my spot," and just like carried on with life. But it was a moment for her to just realize, like, no, this is not working for me. And so I think if there's anything that I've changed through the research I've done is to own my faster and apologize.
mm. That's quite a story. And as you were telling it, and you said she's standing next to you at the car, I'm like, oh no, what's gonna happen? But I wasn't expecting that. Oh my goodness. Um, that's something that'll stay with you for life.
Yeah.
Mm. And her as well.
Hmm.
All right, I got a question for you. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about empathy?
That it's soft and that it's like, that it's not necessary in the workplace.
Mm,
Um, Misconceptions about empathy that I think, okay, so if we're talking about in the workplace, a lot of leaders say, "Oh, it sounds great to have like an empathic workplace, empathic leadership, culture, that kind of thing." But we're high, we're like a productive company. We're like, we have KPIs. We want to knock it out of the park, and all this empathy stuff is going to get in the way.
mm,
And I think the thing I like to debunk about that is I don't care what organization you're in. I don't care what sector. I don't care what country. Every organization has one thing in common, and that is people, until the robots take over, but it's people that are in workplaces together, working in organizations. Okay. And we are complex and we are part of nature. And there's a lot that we don't understand about how we operate. And so when you add more humanity, which, in business speak could be called social capital, when you add the human dimension to work, where people could show up as themselves, as full selves, not just the role and the responsibilities, but like, hey, I'm a dad and my mom is now in a nursing home because she has Alzheimer's, and my wife had breast cancer 2 years ago, and my daughter is going out with a boyfriend that I don't like complex, right? And we show up to do work. If we're denied that and we just live in a workplace that is just about the productivity, just about the work, it's our amygdala is always on. We don't do our best work that way. But if you can bring in a degree of humanity where I see you, you see me, we're humans, guess what happens? It's like trust goes up. You get the emails where somebody's a bit sharp, but you give them the benefit of the doubt. So communication gets better mental health, less absenteeism, like on and on and on and on and on and on. Empathic workplace culture is better for the organization. Point final, just full stop. So I think that's a big misunderstanding.
Thanks for sharing that. I think for people who have been hurt, empathy may be difficult. A lot of things are difficult when you have experienced a wound, especially if it's on a soul level, or even not even on a soul level. But for people who have been hurt, abandoned, or betrayed, empathy can feel dangerous. How do we rebuild trust to care, especially when we've learned that vulnerability isn't always safe?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
Mhm.
And that's a heavy lift for somebody who has felt betrayed or traumatized. So I'm not a psychologist, and maybe there's other people that would be better placed to answer this question. But in my opinion, I think it's in gradual steps. I certainly think the starting point is healing. And finding the anchor person that you can trust, and then building on from that relationship. And I think it's completely reasonable for people to have arm's distance with new people and let somebody earn the trust. Yeah, there is no silver bullet to that one. It's trusting intuition a lot, but I think there is something to be said about the self-talk that if you have been burned, if you've been wounded, if you've been hurt, that you can then poison your own relationships by assuming that all people will be like that. So I think there is some benefit in nurturing a deliberate, self-respecting courage around relationship building, so that you don't deny yourself the possibility of great relationships. So I don't know how you hold both, and maybe sometimes a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but relationships are foundational to who we are as people, and we flourish in context of relationships. So if you've been hurt and you disengage from relationships, that will just worsen your life circumstances, because it will change your mental health. It'll change the way you show up in the world. So to honor yourself, even if you have been wounded, there's still value in saying, I'm going to be courageous anyways. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Let's talk about self-empathy. Um, how do we know when we're truly practicing compassion toward ourselves versus numbing out or avoiding what's hard?
Yeah. So I have experience with numbing out. It's only in the last maybe few months that I've had access to my tears again after about an 8 or 9 year absence. So I haven't cried. I didn't cry for a long time. And I spoke to doctors, I spoke to friends, I went on to check, like I looked it up and I was like, what's wrong with me? So I think I had ossified quite a bit my emotions. And it's only through this somatic work and the parts work that I'm doing that I'm rediscovering and letting my emotions come out. So remind me of your question again so that I answer it.
How do we know when we're truly practicing self compassion versus numbing out?
Um, yeah, because it's really kind of easy if you're feeling hard on yourself to grab something for the fridge or pour a glass of wine or watch another Netflix series or whatever, right? That's the numbing out you're talking about. I mean, we're clever as humans because there's so many ways that we can mask the real thing. Um, and mine was working. I worked. I mean, I love the work that I do. I think it's important work. So you could just there's endless amount of work to do, and just push, right? And it's also like I said earlier, as part of my family's ecosystem of like work before play. But that's numbing out. That's numbing out. So the self compassion is recognizing that we are just humans and we need our bodies need recovery. And if we're just blasting through work, of course we're going to have at some point like either a physical ailment or a burnout, or it's going to impact our relationships. So we have to recognize that we're an organism that needs like plug in, the energy goes, and then we plug out, and we have to like recover. And recovery sometimes sleep, recovery sometimes some mindfulness practices, recovery sometimes like playing on the floor, doing macaroni art with your kid. Um, and sometimes forgiving ourselves. Like, I teach this happiness class and we write a gratitude letter at the beginning of the semester. That one's easy. Writing something, writing a letter to somebody saying why that you're grateful to them. It's a very powerful exercise. And then later in the semester, we do a forgiveness letter. And the forgiveness letter sometimes is to yourself, forgiving yourself for something. And it's powerful how much toxicity we keep in our bodies when we're beating ourselves up over something. And our self-talk, we're so mean to ourselves. We're harder on ourselves than we are to people we like don't even like, or that have hurt us. So just becoming attuned to what the self-talk is. I tell my students all the time, I'm like, yeah, there's something playing in your brain. Even as I'm talking, you're listening to me and you're thinking, you're reflecting on the thoughts. And then you're having more thoughts. And those thoughts can sometimes be in a loop where you're like hard on yourself after you've done something, or you look a particular way, like, oh, why am I wearing this? Or why did I say that? I sounded so stupid. Um, and that's not helpful because sometimes we believe our thoughts and our thoughts are not us. Like we are whole and perfect and amazing, but we believe our thoughts and our thoughts are sometimes very poisonous to us. So some of the self-compassion is just like, I've been taught, I don't do it all the time, but now I share it with others. This gentleman also at McGill who studies mindfulness and compassion, on a podcast when I was interviewing him, I said, why is it that I like at the end of the day, let's say I slay my to-do list. So I get through like, 20 things and I've worked a hard day and I'm laying in bed. Why am I not just whoa, amazing? Instead, I'm like, oh, and I didn't get to this. And oh my God, tomorrow, oh my God, I didn't do this. Why are we so hard on ourselves? And so the practice he taught me is, you can do this with me, Jalan. You rub your hands until you feel heat, and then you put them on your chest at your heart. And you say, today, I did the best I could. Or right now, I'm doing the best I can. Just that little bit of tenderness.
Wow, that's deep. I think empathy and self love we look at it as something as like not a hard concept, but it really almost has to be decoded. And you've done a masterful job of that. And so I want to ask you, with all that you're doing to help people, especially as it pertains to empathy, what is it you want people to know most?
Oof, great question. So at the end of my interviews, I always ask the same question of my guests. And some of them are like they're, all over the world, they're in different disciplines. And the question is, if you were could you tell me a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you? And I never know what I'm going to get as a story. Never. But I look forward to it because inevitably, every single time, no exception, people will tell me something that will move me. And it moves them to recount the story. They could talk about how, a parent was dying in the hospital and a nurse went above and beyond. And that they just, like, at the moment of transition, the nurse gave a few minutes to someone and then they'll come in and put a hand on the shoulder in a powerfully empathic way. And just that gesture encapsulated everything that they needed. And so there's that. I've had stories of like a teacher from high school that they'll remember that wrote on a report card like a message that just kept them going, even though like the rest of the teachers in the school didn't seem to give a like everybody can remember a time when they felt someone else's empathy and how powerful that moment was for them in the moment it happened and in the moment that they're recounting it. And so as I'm sharing, I'm feeling emotional because I'm like conjuring up all of the hundreds of stories I've heard. So I think the message I would want to lead and the connection I'm making to your question is, if you can picture an old-fashioned radio with a radio dial, right? We just need to turn up the volume of empathy in our lives just a little bit and just a little more often. And guess what happens? Not only do we not know how far and big of an impact it could be for someone else, like that lady that got 2 minutes of my time at the FedEx counter, right? Who got a chance to just share and feel humanity and feel her poise come back and feel like somebody like just understood that she was going through a lot of stress at that moment. So that's like nothing, I didn't plan to do that, but yet it was a big deal. So we can do that all throughout our day, any day, at all moments. And the benefit comes back to us. It's like and this is real science. If my brain had been connected to an fMRI machine at the time that we were holding hands across the counter, the part of my brain that would have been lit up is the pleasure and reward center of my brain. The same part that gets activated when we're eating delicious dessert, when we're like in post orgasm bliss, high on psychedelics. It's the pleasure and reward centers of our brain that are lit up. So it feels good to us at a neurological level. And if my body had been like attached to a bunch of other machines to read my breathing, like a bunch of other like things going on in my body, whatever stress hormones I would have been feeling by her, like, first of all, waiting for half an hour, oh, get me out of here. And then her rude behavior, I would have been full of cortisol. But then in that moment where we're like in this empathic embrace, I call it, I would have been flooded by new hormones like oxytocin, serotonin, all those like bonding emotions, the feel good hormones that are available to us when we are deeply connected to somebody. So I guess the invitation would be for people to like, hey, guess what? It's free, man. It's contagious too. Like, turn up the volume of empathy in your life and reap the reward. It's a win-win, man.
Thank you for sharing that the way you shared it too. All right. Last question for you. And this is the last question I ask all my guests as well.
You got one too.
If you could use your platform to educate anyone who may be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain of how or where to start, what would you say?
You are not alone. And reach out to someone. And give yourself permission to be vulnerable. Because you can tell a story in a couple of different ways. One way is to tell the story and to let the person in on it from a like intellectual level, like they're hearing what you're talking about. And then there's a different way of telling the story, which is to let your feelings guide what you're talking about, which is how you introduced me, because you were present for it. You weren't just trying to read through a bio. You were humanizing me. You were with the words. You were talking about me, just like you ask all your questions. And when you show up present for what you're talking about with courage and vulnerability, it's impossible to ignore. It's impossible for somebody to not pay attention to what you're saying. And that's scary, especially if you've been hurt or disappointed. But that's why I say, don't give up on your value and the fundamental truth that you deserve to be seen by others. And just find that other person or people who will see you and hear you because they're there. That's what I would say.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to share space with you. Thank you for the work that you've done to decode empathy, to give it language. Thank you for standing in that parking spot that day. Because hearing that story, you changed someone's life by not reacting, by giving her an opportunity to sit with what she did, and then respond appropriately. Um, so I'm grateful to have this opportunity to do this with you. And I just want to say thank you again. And also, if people wanted to find you online or on social media, where would they be able to look you up?
So AnitaNowak.com. So AnitaNowak. Here's my book. I'm on YouTube. I'm like just under 1,000 subscribers. Would love to have you be the driver of, that threshold. Purposeful Empathy. And I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and all that stuff. And I post a daily empathy post. So if people want to have a daily dose of empathy in their life, good for that.
And then where can people find the book?
Anywhere you buy books. Okay. So any online platform, you can order the book, including independent bookstores. If you go to my website and you go to the books tab, I've got like a dozen different retailers. You don't have to buy it from Amazon, but I'm happy if you do.
All right. Well, Dr. Nowak, again, thank you for this. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for how you do it.
Oh, thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you.